Hey everybody, it's Curse, and today I'm going to bless you with my first rogue build guide. I've been working on this Marksman build for a while now, and while the performance is not S tier, it's a ton of fun. We're combining spell damage and throwing attack damage together with 3 different damage abilities and end up with a really fun playstyle. One thing I learned while playing Marksman for a while now is that you'd really want to lean into its innate high stun chance and use that to your advantage. It's basically a hidden survivability tool. You're a little bit squishier, but you stun enemies in order to survive longer. This build was also buffed with 0.91. I haven't had a chance to farm a Dragonsong with the brand new shard that gives you base crit chance as well as attack speed. So it's a really good time to try it out, see how you like it, and see if you can iterate on it and take it to another level. But yeah, just enjoy the playstyle and all of the explosions that are happening. It's great, and the enemies get stun locked quite a bit. Oh, and shout out to my man Malaka TV for running a very similar build before I did and planting the idea for me to try it out later on. Thanks, man. And with that, irashaimase! Alright, let's jump into the build guide. So, starting with the skills. Cinder Strike in this build is a utility skill. So first off, you want to get Kindling 2 points to get your Fire Red Shred chance. And this is something that was buffed with 0.91 because Fire Red Shred didn't work before 0.91. It just didn't. It was bugged. Make sure you get 2 points here to unlock Burning Daggers. And you only want 111 here because we're not going to be dealing damage with Burning Daggers. They're there to proc the unique bow Dragonsong's Dragon Fire. That's their primary purpose. We also don't want this node because we don't want to be using up our shadows with Cinder Strike and with these Burning Daggers. We want to be saving our shadows for Umbro Blades. Then we go into Oil Coating, and Oil Coating is a phenomenal support skill for this build especially. With 5 points in here, you start getting Oil Coating stacks that last 4 seconds and they can compound. And then with all these other nodes, you get also dodge rating per stack, fire res per stack, 5 throwing fire damage per stack. This is incredible as well. And then this converts the fire bonus damage from this node into elemental bonus damage, which is really important because we're going to be running the boots that give us cold damage. And just to give you some perspective, you probably saw in the Jora video, we get up to 15 stacks or so of oil coating, which is 75 throwing fire damage and 375 fire% damage in total. On top of that, we get 30% fire pen, we get 600 dodge rating, infinite fire res. Oil coating is a perfect support skill for the build. If you don't happen to have 26 skill points like I do, you can take away 1 from Kindling, as well as a few from Oil Coating and Elusive. I would recommend keeping the 5 points in Coated Darts because throwing fire damage is super good for the build. For the next skill, we'll go into Decoy. And Decoy, with all of those extra throwing fire damage from Oil Coating, as well as from the code damage boots that I'll showcase later, deals insane damage. It's on 5-second cooldown, as you can see. So that's a bit of a problem, but it has a lot of more damage nodes. So even though it's on a 5-second cooldown, you drop them and everything on the screen dies. So this is double damage. This is times 1.5. So that's 3x the damage. This is times 1.15. So now we're at 350% roughly. And this is times another 2.25. And so now we're roughly at like 7.58 times the damage. And then we triple that because we're throwing 3 decoys. So all of your damage from decoy is multiplied by something like 25 times. And it also has added throwing damages applied at 600% effectiveness to the explosion. So the scaling of this skill is tremendous. We're also stacking a lot of dexterity for the boots. So we have a really high increased damage, as you can see, 350%. So Decoy is our primary damage dealer for the build. Make sure you get all of these damage amplifying nodes. You also want to create shadows because it synergizes well with Umbro Blades. And if you follow the build guide, you'll get 23 skill points in it as well. So don't worry about that. Next is Umbral Blade for a tertiary source of damage. Basically, with all the shadows that we're creating, this is very much almost a passive damage source. You only have to throw them once every 3 to 5 seconds just to utilize all of your shadows that are created from your smoke bomb as well as from your decoys. And then they do their thing, they explode, do a lot of fire damage because we have extra fire damage from coated darts. And we have explosive blades, which makes it scale with fire damage really well. Make sure to get Edge of Obscurity so that damage gets scaled per stack of Dust Shroud. And so it's 16% more damage if you're standing in your smoke bomb per stack of Dust Shroud. So that leads us to our next skill that we'll highlight here, and that is Smoke Bomb, where we have to get Dust Shroud, obviously, for that synergy with Umbral Blades. And then you go on the left-hand side, you increase the duration to make it as long as possible. You get 6% crit chance while standing in it. Basically maxes out your crit. This might be irrelevant if you can get that brand new shard into your bow, though. Or if you have a 7% bow and Umbral Assault, so that you can create shadows in your smoke bomb and then utilize them for your Umbral Blades. The few remaining skill points you can put into larger area, growth speed. And finally, Shift. Shift is also a utility skill in this case. We have it on 3-second cooldown, so you have 50% uptime on this extra move speed. It's a little bit of mana recovery, doesn't hurt. An extra shadow doesn't hurt. Invulnerability while shifting, and then a little bit of extra dexterity for a second, so a third of an uptime. And finally, the kill threshold here is super useful for boss fights. 16% kill threshold. And that's it, basically, for the skills. And now let's go over the itemization. Starting off with core items. Items that you must have in this build to make it work. Dragonsong is the first core item. And I love Dragonsong. It's a really good bow all around. It gives you extra damage with spells and attacks. It gives you extra attack speed and cast speed with fire skills. It gives you crit chance with fire skills. And it gives you a chance to cast Dragonfire on crit. And so Dragonfire in this build is basically how we clear large groups of enemies during that downtime of decoy. Because it is on a 5-second cooldown. Dragonfire also stun locks a lot of enemies, so it's really useful for that purpose, but it doesn't necessarily deal insane amounts of damage. The ideal Dragonsong would have the prefixes of tier 7 bow attack speed, tier 5 hybrid bow attack speed plus base crit chance, the brand new shard that came out in 0.91, plus the suffix of stun chance or shock chance, one of those two suffixes. Because we are running a stun build essentially, and we're trying to stun lock enemies as much as possible so that the cooldown of decoy doesn't feel as bad. And all around, Dragonsong, I find it to be a really fun item to play with. And this is probably the area of the build where I have the most room for improvement. This Dragonsong is not very good. Only 4% crit and only tier 6 bow attack speed and really bad secondary LP investment. So if you can get a 3 LP Dragonsong, which is also doable by the way, because the effective level for legendary potential is decently low for Dragonsong. So all around, just a great item. The second core item for the build is Kelthan's Blasting Agent. And we need this basically for the 160% cooldown recovery for decoy. Without that, this build is really not that viable because decoy is on like a ridiculous cooldown and it's not really fun at all. The remaining affixes are decent. You know, fire penetration is really good, 17%. It's quite nice. And reduced decoy duration is also great. In terms of ideal prefixes, I think I got the right ones here. Obviously, you want tier 7 Cinder Strike if you have it, but Cinder Strike Dexterity is probably the best case scenario here. Again, it's theoretically possible to have a 3 LP Kelthan Blasting Agent, but if you happen to get that, just work on your defenses with the suffix slot. And now I'll highlight our last core item for the build. It's these boots, Morning Frost. Without these boots, we just don't deal enough damage. And that is a bit of a problem for Marksman in general. you'll notice most Marksman builds run these boots. So I think I would love to see a nerf to the boots and a buff to Marksman overall. But yeah, +1 cold damage to attacks and spells per point of dexterity is tremendous here. Once you get your dexterity up to like 80, 100, you can really feel that extra damage. And also it applies to both our throwing attacks and our spells. So it buffs our Dragonfire spell, as well as our decoy, our Umbral Blades, and even the Cinder Strike throwing attacks as well. And best part is that Cinder Strike, thanks to this node elemental vulnerability, it buffs the cold damage from Morning Frost as well. So great synergy all around for the build. Ideally, you want tier 7 dexterity and move speed. As you can see here, I have the tier 7 dexterity. And you really want to work on your physical and cold resistances in order to mitigate the -1 resistances per point of dexterity that the boots add. And that's it for the core items. Now, in terms of semi-core, I really like Arrow Guard. The Glancing Blow adds to the tankiness of the build quite a bit. It has a very low effective level for LP, and that makes it a very strong quiver for this build. The ideal prefixes would be bow attack speed and dexterity, either one of them being tier 7. I might even lean towards dexterity in this case, but tier 7 bow attack speed is great as well. And then for suffixes, stun chance. I love stun chance, so get that if you can. Shock on hit is not bad either. And yeah, that's it for the quiver. And then another semi-core item is Liraka's Claws for that throwing critical strike multiplier. That increases the damage of the build significantly because we're critting at a very high rate, especially if you can get that new shard into your bow. That's going to bring you up to like 100% crit chance. And so that means that 130% throwing crit multi is going to increase your decoy DPS by like 50%, something like that. Better yet, if you can get high endurance on the gloves and 2 or 3 LP with the right prefixes of dexterity, throwing damage, hybrid health. That's what you want in gloves like these. You can see that I whiffed my tier 6 hybrid health, but I got 2 great prefixes, so I can't complain. Another great addition to the build. I'm torn between calling it a semi-core or not. We'll go with semi-core, but I think the build can survive without it either. It's just, this is how you add quite a bit more damage to your Dragonfire spell. If you read that line, +6 spell damage for fire and necrotic skills per stack of ignite on you. And then you have a chance to ignite yourself when you use a fire or necrotic skill. And so even though Cinder Strike is not a spell, it's a fire skill. That means you're going to ignite yourself by using it, and then that extra spell damage is going to be applied to your Dragonfire spells. The Frenzy for 2 seconds is great as well. We always love more attack speed. And Cleanse Ailments on potion use is not bad either. So if you can get a really well rolled 2 LP Immortalator's Oblation, I would say yeah, use that in the build. Otherwise, if you don't have this belt, I think you can survive without it. Omnis, I think, is a really good choice for an amulet. This build benefits from all skills quite a bit. The crit chance is nice. You really need physical and cold resistances in the build, so I think the 7 res bonus of the amulet can be quite beneficial for the build, so I would recommend Omnis. And then in terms of rings, you can see I'm running a tier 7 crit in a crit implicit ring as well. You can probably change that around once you get your base crit chance shard into your Dragonsong. But otherwise, yeah, I would actually spec the rings a little bit more into dexterity as well as survivability. So either fizz and cold res or health. The build needs a lot more health than I'm putting in it right now. This is a really good ring. I wish everything was maxed. You can see a bunch of tier 4s there. But these are basically the perfect prefixes and suffixes that you can ask for. Dexterity, health, tier 7 cold res to alleviate the cold resistance issue from the boots. And then extra crit chance, which we're not maxed out on crit chance, so it's really good. And all of that in a ruby ring. The extra fire damage is great for the build. For chest piece, I recommend using a crit strike avoidance one. Make sure to get dexterity and then a bunch of survivability in your suffixes. I would prioritize survivability from your chest, from your helmet as well, just because the build suffers for survivability. You can see my helmet is not the best, but it's alright. So that is it for the items. I'll include a build planner that optimizes the affixes a little bit better. But all in all, this build is quite hungry from an item perspective. You can see I'm running a lot of legendaries with high LP. So this is not a cheap build. Keep that in mind. In terms of idols, I'm running basically just survivability HP idols and cold res idols. Just stuff to make sure I live as long as possible. And then one idol to improve my armor shred. And you can notice that this build works just as well on a Bladedancer. Like, you can keep every single item the same except for the bow and quiver and replace those with like 2 daggers. And now all of a sudden you're still at 100% crit chance. Every single skill is the same. Cinder Strike is now melee, so you can get even higher attack speed from it. It's just a little bit more exposed because you're in melee. In that case, I would recommend trying to run Dusk Shroud or melee hit chest piece. But yeah, it's very much viable on a Bladedancer as well. In terms of blessings, for the first one here, I would recommend Crit Multi. A good option is also Life Leech on throwing attacks, but that is more relevant if you're running this build as a Bladedancer. Marksman doesn't need that because of all of the health on hit and health on crit procs that it has. For the second blessing, Stun Chance. That's where it's at. You want to be running Stun Chance here, and 160% is significant, especially when you combine it with your passive right here that gives you 20% per stack of Sharpshooter. So 10 stacks, that's 200% stun chance. Plus the 160 from our blessing, plus extra from our quiver. We're running something like 400, 500% stun chance. That's a recipe for stun lock. It's great. And honestly, this blessing doesn't have any other better options anyways. Next, we want the all res from Reign of Dragons just because we're suffering for resistances because of our boots. And for the same reason, we also want physical resistances from Age of Winter. Another decent option is cold resistances, if that's also from the same exact blessing. So if you happen to have one of these better taken care of through your items, you can choose which one to go for here. And then extra endurance is what I went for with Spirits of Fire, just to try and max out my endurance and work on my tankiness a little bit. And that's it for the blessings. And now in terms of passives, I've opted to max every single attack speed passive that I have, every single dexterity passive that I have, and then the rest we need a little bit of mana recovery. Extra crit chance here is solid. Glancing blow chance are maxed as well whenever we get a chance to do so. So you can see here a dexterity and glancing blow chance. Perfect node. Make sure to max this one ASAP. Otherwise, we get a little bit of move speed here, a little bit of health here, extra attack speed. Max this one as well. The health gained is really valuable. Max dexterity and dodge rating debuff. This is great for those pesky monolith modifiers that make enemies dodge your attacks. This is just really, really valuable, I'd say. And then we have critical vulnerability as well as critical strike avoidance. This bow crit multi doesn't do anything for us because we don't actually do any bow damage. So this is only for the crit avoidance. If you have better itemization, you can definitely take these out and these 5 points out and allocate them probably somewhere else, maybe into crit chance here or somewhere on this half of the tree just to be able to reach this point, the requirement of 25 points. And now let's quickly go over the skill rotation. Basically, you start spamming Cinder Strike and you can see it triggering Dragon Fire as well and giving you stacks of oil coating. When you have a few stacks, you can pop your decoy, also activate your smoke bomb. Now you have 3 shadows. Whenever you have 3 shadows, make sure to pop your Umbro Blades and just every now and then pop them while continuously firing Cinder Strike while dodging enemies. So that is the skill rotation and it's pretty straightforward. Just make sure when you hit 3 shadows, use up your Umbro Blades so that they're not wasted. When you decoy, immediately follow that up with Umbro Blades. And this time I've added something new for leveling purposes. if you're trying to level a brand new character with this build, keep in mind that it's very item intensive and you're going to have a very hard time before you acquire all of these items. Regardless, if you still want to try it out, I have added the skill progression so you can see how I would recommend you should spec your skills over time. The decoy here is the most important one, but again, without Kelthan's blasting agent, decoy is not a great skill. So I strongly recommend acquiring a Kelthan's before running this build. Otherwise, I would recommend this kind of build progression. And yeah, I've added it for all of these skills. So go ahead and check it out if you want. And I hope it adds some value to you. All right, so let's see how the build fares in our build tier list. So we have it right here, Marksman, Dragonsong, Kelthan hybrid damage build. As you saw the Joe review, it's about 50 to 7 seconds, which is a B tier. It's not amazing, but could have been worse. And the solid mobility actually makes it a little bit of a smoother experience, to be honest. Monoliths, I pushed it to 460. You can definitely push it higher and run it fairly smoothly, especially if you fix the survivability a little bit. My itemization was not great for survivability. I think you could definitely get 500 more HP fairly easily. And so you could certainly push it higher, especially with the better bow as well. Mobility is great though. So I put it at A+ tier for corruption pushing. Survivability is B+. Mostly because a lot of our item slots and affix slots are taken up by legendaries and by dexterity. And so there isn't much room left for survivability slots like affixes. Multiplayer utility is decent just because of the stun chance, because of the fire rest shred, and you can even apply this crowd to your allies with smoke bomb. So it's pretty decent. Cost to itemize, however, is a weak point for the build. As you saw, you require 3 core items, as well as a few other semi-core items. So we put a B here and a final tier of A-. So the build is alright, but when you compare it to a lot of other classes and the builds that they have at their disposal, it's not amazing. What it is, though, is a lot of fun. Stunning enemies and just all of these fiery animations that are really well done. It's a blast. And now check out some Corruption 460 Monolith gameplay to get a sense of how the build works in a real Monolith scenario. Notice how often enemies get stunned by pretty much every single ability that we use. That is one of the strengths of this build. Perpetual stuns on every single enemy. Decoy stuns even bosses. And all of the animations are spectacular, so it's a pretty fun marksman build overall. I hope you enjoyed the build guide. If you did, please drop a like and subscribe. Come and join me on Twitch as well as we try new builds, as we play around with stuff. And just a quick update on what's coming up in the next few weeks. Diablo 4 is launching on June 1st, and I'm going to be playing heavily. I've taken 3 weeks off of work just to focus on that. So please join me on Twitch, as I'll probably prioritize Twitch for the first little bit until I have some interesting content to share. My channel was also selected for the Twitch and D4 Support a Streamer event, which means that if you come and watch my stream between June 5th and July 2nd and gift 2 subs, you get a Primal Instinct mount as a reward. So if you're interested in getting that reward and you feel like supporting the channel, I would really appreciate it. But if you don't care for the mounts and all the cosmetics, it's all good. I will be playing Barbarian in D4. So if you want to watch me optimize some Barbarian builds, come and have fun. But before D4, I do hope to release at least one more video for Last Epoch over the weekend. We'll see if I can manage it. I'm planning something special, but no guarantees. We'll see. Either way, love y'all, take it easy, and gochiso sama deshita.